Welcome to Books in the Biz, the show where real-world business meets real-world results. Hosted by business strategist Dan Paulson and veteran CFO Richard Beltry, this podcast breaks down the stories, trends, and financial insights shaping today's companies. Dan brings decades of experience helping leaders simplify operations, build strong cultures, and scale with confidence. Rich adds his deep financial expertise from guiding organizations across healthcare, construction, logistics, and professional services. Together, they dig into what's really happening behind the numbers and what it means for owners, executives, and anyone trying to grow a stronger, smarter business. This is practical conversation, real talk, and tools you can use right now. Welcome to Books in the Biz.
Welcome back to Books in the Biz. Rich, how's everything out on the East Coast?
Getting warmer, finally.
Getting warmer, yes. It is a warm day here. You will be getting that soon, and then we're getting a cool off, so it's going to get cool again. We're not alone here. Somebody else snuck in. Do you see that?
No.
Kelly Murphy. Kelly is an HR expert, and she has agreed to join us to educate us in all the details of HR. Kelly, welcome aboard.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful to have you here. Both Rich and I tend to talk about HR at a very high level. Again, I talk about more from an operations side. Rich is more, of course, the financial side. So it's good for you to actually bring in the organizational side of HR and maybe what a lot of companies are missing. But first of all, I always like to find out how the heck you got to where you're at. So tell me a little bit more about yourself and your company, if you would, please.
Okay, so Kelly Murphy, nice to meet everyone. So I've been in HR, in and around HR for the better part of 20 years now. Majority of that time was in corporate, small and large organizations. I founded Lean In HR in 2023 and have been refining my focus in working with businesses typically between 10 and 50 employees. Obviously, that's a bit of a spectrum. And just helping them with day-to-day HR. So I am that person who will get in there and roll up my sleeves and handle whatever needs to be done from the HR perspective.
That is quite a bit in companies of those sizes, because I find in my experience when I'm dealing with that same type of audience is a lot of times they don't have an HR person. So they are just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. And Rich, I don't know what you can add to it, what you see, but probably very similar things, don't you?
I see it all the time. And it's the last one that I saw was when I went into a company that was a pretty decent size, had 15 plus employees, and the CEO's attitude was, we don't have any of those issues. That was his answer. So yeah, I've seen enough.
Is that before or after the lawsuit? I'm just curious.
I think the lawsuit was coming.
They don't say that after the lawsuit.
They probably don't. Kelly, so from your perspective, what are some of the things that you see out there? I know for us, I think we were even kind of talking about this offline, that there's assumptions that owners make that on how they classify employees, how they treat employees. Maybe at some point in this conversation, we can also talk about at-will employment and how at-will employment is kind of a different thing in today's world than it was maybe 15, 20 years ago. But, kind of what are you seeing?
So there's a lot to unpack here. So I'll start with some observations that you all are seeing, because I'm seeing the same thing. HR is, especially for the small companies, is either typically handled by the owner And it's starting where I come in is HR is starting to become an administrative burden. It's just too much. They're growing. It's getting in the way of them growing their business. The other common scenario that I see most often is that HR has been lumped onto someone else, like a CFO or the office manager. And that person is fantastic at their job. That's usually why HR got put with them, but they do not have the skill and expertise. And it's not their fault. It's nothing that they did wrong. They just don't have that particular skill set. And that's where companies get into trouble. So one of the things that I'm seeing and starting to talk about a little more openly is there's some stereotypes, I would say, around HR and the topic of HR and what consultants bring to the table. And one of the conversations that I find myself having a lot is it is not this all or nothing scenario where you work with a consultant, or if a business is thinking about hiring a consultant, it's like, okay, we have to give them everything. We have to open up all of our systems and show them everything. And I don't necessarily want them to see how we've been handling things or mishandling things in the past. So the support can be on a sliding scale, and that's the day-to-day reality that I have with my clients. So sometimes we ramp up if they're getting into a busy season, and as we get things set up, then we can taper down the service. So really bend and flex with the needs of the business. But I think that's kind of my most important message here of, it doesn't have to be this broad sweep of, a consultant's going to come in, they're going to take over everything, they're going to tell us everything that we've been doing wrong and wipe out everything and rebuild it. That is just not the day-to-day reality. A more realistic approach is to take a look at what you do have in place. And for the most part, the foundational pieces are there. Maybe we need to reconfigure them a little bit or build out some more structure, but we can start with what you have and then go from there. It doesn't have to be this whole scorched earth approach of everything that you've been doing needs to be totally wiped clean. It just doesn't have to happen.
So where do you see most companies struggle with that? If there was one thing out there that you'd say is more common, especially in the company sizes you're talking about, between that kind of 2 and 50 range, what's usually the number one issue that kind of gets them to think, hey, maybe we need to hand this off to somebody else? Almost
always it's compliance. Something around compliance. Employee classifications is a big one. And I get why people do it. So by employee classifications, we'll just keep it simple, like hourly or salary. So they will make a designation either for the person rather than the role. And they're also not aware of or consulting the Fair Labor Standards Act, more easily said FLSA, that provides guidelines on whether a role should be salary or hourly. They will make part-time people salary for sake of, for ease of payroll, which I get it in the day-to-day. We're all busy, but that is just not the right way to do it. And that is a huge risk. As far as the other things I see, it is really around compliance of just mishandling situations, particularly around terminations and corrective action, kind of getting to that point where they detect that there's a performance issue. May or may not be conversations happening. It's even less likely there's documentation there, which really opens them up for that employee turning around and raising a lawsuit, which may or may not be legitimate.
Well, and you pointed out some key issues there where, as I talked about as we opened up, at-will employment isn't necessarily at-will employment anymore. You got to make sure you have all your I's dotted and T's crossed. Rich, Kelly even mentioned that a lot of times this gets thrown on the CFO role, and I know you've had to deal with some of this too. What are some of the issues or challenges from a financial side when the financial person's dealing with HR?
Yeah, there definitely is a tie between the HR and the CFO side of running the small business, and I honestly don't see it because from the financial side, I don't know what Kelly knows. I know enough to be really dangerous. But it's very much, depending on what kind of business I go into to work on, if it's people centric or technology centric, which lately we've gone more, I think, technology centric, which takes away a little bit. But, you go into some of these other companies that are very key on their employees, then I don't know enough to really know how to dig in and see what they already have, or, the cleanest example of a company that I went into was $100 million company with 600 employees. They had an entire HR department to handle that because of the sheer size. And then when you go into companies that are smaller, then none of that's there. So I find it difficult to figure out where should we be, And so I think that's where most of my questions come from. I don't know that I really have a question in what I just said, but where does it come from that, I should be needling people to say, you need somebody on that HR side. Is there a matrix that says absolutely 100%? It almost sounds like if they hire one, they should have somebody.
Potentially. I think that might be a little bit premature in terms of bringing in a consultant. They owners or founders or president, whatever the title is, whoever is running the company, can handle a portion of these pieces on their own, especially these repeatable tasks. Like, you don't necessarily need to hire a consultant to create your onboarding checklist or your job description or job posting. You certainly can. Several of my clients do. They're just like, handle everything as I need to focus on growing my business. But there are some of those day-to-day tasks that the owners can handle themselves. Where it gets a little bit tricky is when it starts to get into the gray area. So this is often, there's not structure there. They might be seeing some turnover and they don't know why. There may be some performance situations, and then obviously we have already talked about termination. So the tipping point is where the owner's just like, "Ooh, I'm just feeling a little uncomfortable with this. I hope I did this right. I hope I don't get sued." Things like that keeps people up at night. That would be the time to start looking at outsourcing and getting some expert help in. It's just being open-minded about that of, okay, I've built what I can build, and now we need to build some more structure around it. So I'll go back to the turnover. So you have your job, your job posting, your hiring, everything is going fine. And then all of a sudden, people are leaving within their first 90 days. Well, why? What's the reason? So that's where a consultant will come in and help dig into this. Is it the hiring process, the screening process? Is it onboarding? Is it the manager? What is happening that's triggering this pattern? So this is what I'm talking about building a structure. Forms are great and forms are essential, but you have to build a supportive structure around it so the business can scale on top of it.
Now, as we talk about all this, one of the things you kind of touched on earlier is, what happens when somebody leaves, and, is there going to be a lawsuit or something like that? Where do companies tend to be most at risk? Because what I often see, especially in smaller companies, is, the business owner starts it. They believe that they have control and say over everything, and they can do, some think they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, and there's no recourse or consequences to it. But the reality is it could be significantly financially expensive, either from a lawsuit side or just from a compliance side. What are some of the issues that you see out there, and how is that related to the cost if you do tend to mix something up and don't take care of it properly?
Lack of documentation is top of the list. So when somebody leaves, if they decide at any point that they feel that they were wronged by the company, legitimately or not, the onus is on the company to prove that it did not happen. Whatever they're being accused of did not happen. So if you don't have any documentation because something, like nothing did happen, it's very difficult to prove. So this is why documenting each step along the way is so critical. Even in the beginning, like if you're just doing coaching or a verbal, send an email, send something, hey, so-and-so, we chatted today. Here's a summary of our conversation. Please course correct in this area. That way you have some sort of documentation kind of along the way to show the progression of what was happening. Was this employee able to correct their behavior or not?
I do see a lot of that too, and that's I think where maybe you and I overlap a little bit, because I am constantly harping on my clients about making sure, okay, you had that discussion with them, where's it documented? Because you might have to come back to this discussion again, and as a reminder for you, you need to know what you talked about. But on top of it all, if this does go south in some way, you now have a record, because somebody eventually could ask for that record and say, okay, when you let this person go, what were the steps that led up to that?
Correct. Did you give them a fair chance? And I get why it doesn't happen. It takes time. It is a little annoying sometimes to have a conversation and then document that same conversation. So I have heard, of course, plenty of times, it's like, this is a waste of time. We had a conversation. We're all adults. Let's just move on. But that invariably leads to I've told them 1,000 times. This may be true, but if there's nothing to back it up, then that's going to potentially put the owner or the business in a difficult spot, because again, prove it.
Yep.
The employee say, I didn't know.
Yep. Financially, what sort of risk does a company potentially take on, either from a lawsuit side, or let's say, you and I live in Wisconsin, so Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development, for example, will get the complaint, and then they have to deal with the complaint. And what happens if the complaint sides with the employee, for example?
So this is like lawsuits and even claims can turn into this like snowball compounding effect. So you'll have cost of attorneys if you need to get to that point, cost of your time or whoever internally is responding to the claim. That is someone who has to be intimate with the situation, be digging into the document. Like that stuff does take time and it takes resources. And if the CEO is working on that, then that means they're not out building their business. Like that's a big salary to be working on effectively an administrative task. So kind of on with this compounding thing, worst case scenario, this employee goes onto social media, goes onto Glassdoor, goes onto Google, and is disparaging the company and leaving a poor review. That's there forever. There you can respond to it, but it is there. So these, it's like trying to stop a train. It's like if you handled it in the beginning, or a little more proactive with your conversations, with your cultural, just kind of coming at it from a vulnerable perspective of how can I be a better leader, then handling, setting the culture in that way. And then, okay, we document everything to protect both of us and save everyone some trouble. So this can even impact recruiting. I don't know about you, but before I'm going to buy something or do business with someone, I check out their reviews. I think that's very common, particularly during recruiting. Other candidates are looking at, they're like, what's it really like to work here? Let me see what Glassdoor says. And if things don't look quite right, or if there's lots of complaints on there, then you can lose that talent. They'll never even give your company the time of day.
And that's where I think owners or any business executive forgets how accessible social media or even online platforms have made it for others to review your business. And sometimes those complaints are legitimate, sometimes they're not. So I'm also hoping that the employees that are looking at it are also looking at the patterns and seeing what's going on there. But it is something that you have to be aware of. And there's a lot of times you'll see postings where the company hasn't put in sort of any rebuttal or anything like that. Do you help out with that kind of reputation management side of things of HR, or is that somebody else's job?
Absolutely. Always respond. Always respond in a fair and kind manner. Obviously, you cannot share anything confidential, but I have found it very helpful to say, acknowledge the complaint, because if you just ignore it or if you're trying to argue, that's not going to be helpful. So acknowledge that person's complaint and then talk openly, share openly about what you can of, hey, we've either implemented a stronger structure around this, or this is the typical process we follow. Like, there's always an authentic way to respond to these complaints where it's like, hey, we care, we're paying attention, and we're taking your feedback and improving from it. We're trying to get better, and candidates appreciate that. I found while I was recruiting that candidates will mention it. And they're just like, oh, that was your response. I saw that. And that's the reason I applied for this job, because it's obvious you care.
Oh, that's good. That's good. What are other things that, maybe companies need to look at to make sure they have? You talked some about documentation, both from the onboarding side and from the coaching side of things. But what are some other tools or resources that companies should really look at implementing from an HR standpoint?
The initial HR structure, if you don't have one, that would be a good opportunity to hire that out instead of cobbling it together. So this is just kind of, what are we doing for hiring, onboarding, performance, kind of these major areas. Get some help for someone with the expertise to build that structure for you. And the other thing critically important is the handbook. The good old handbook that nobody wants to read. I think the handbook is vastly underestimated in its protection and in its power. It protects the employee, but it protects the business as well. And it becomes the go-to document when it is actually updated and it is relevant and accurate for the business. This does become a resource, like the go-to guide for everyone in the company, the owner included. So if an employee comes in with a question, it's like, let's go see, if they don't know how to answer, it's like, let's go see what the handbook says. And we will go with that because we know that this is solid and this is going to protect everyone in the best possible way. This is so much better than just trying to answer off the cuff, and then you end up telling two people, giving two different answers for the same question, and then you're going to have another conversation after that.
That you will. Rich, I've been talking a lot. What other questions do you have from the financial side that maybe you see as a concern or something that should be talked about?
I think where to start, always becomes the issue. I think I like the fact that you brought up the handbook. I always think of the handbook as, step one. And so many companies don't have one. Like, even though they're I would say a basic handbook is relatively easy to get as a template almost. I've seen them before where you can at least have that and work off of that, but people don't do it. So, I've always had sort of that issue, like, well, what are you telling people then?
Yeah. I'll offer a different perspective with the handbook templates. I think they are a great starting point, but I cannot tell you how many handbooks I've seen that have been, shall we say, borrowed from another company or cobbled together. I was recently looking at a handbook and I was like, went to the owner, I'm going through because I'm updating it. I'm going through and I was like, who is Bob? I know all of the staff and there's not a Bob on staff. So who is Bob? Because his name was all over the handbook. I won't say which company, of course, but the owner was just like, well, we downloaded it from somewhere. I'm not going to tell you where. We don't have a Bob. So, it's just like pulling things out like that. There was, and again, like I'd say 40% of the handbook that they've cobbled together, just little bits and pieces. Some were very obvious from ChatGPT, and they just copy and paste it in there. So it's like, this is not even relevant to your operations. Let's tie this together, clean it up, and make this a useful document. Because otherwise it could, it could work against them. The employee says, oh, well, it says this is our policy. And the owner says, no, it's not, because they didn't review the handbook. This is where you get into trouble. So templates are great for a starting point, but definitely that is something I would say, like, don't skimp on this. Get an HR professional to do your handbook. It can, like I do it as a project. I can do it as a one-time project. Get it done, review it every year or two, and that will give the greatest level of protection, I think, more than anything else.
That is a very good point. That is a very good point. As we're wrapping up here, what's the best thing that you might be able to help them with? I know we were talking about, you actually have a service that you offer to kind of help companies, especially small companies, try to figure out what steps they need to take to kind of protect themselves. What is that, and what would be the best way to get a hold of you from there?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. The best place to start is you need a map. If you're trying to figure out where you need to go, you need a map. So the service you mentioned is HR System Snapshot. It's completely free, and it's kind of like a 40,000 foot view of the major areas from the HR perspective. So that will, you can take it and do nothing else after that, and it will kind of give you some direction of some of the pieces that you need to put into place. But if you are wanting to dig in a little bit further, I have a very comprehensive HR assessment. And again, that's one time, and it will go through every aspect of your business, primarily from the HR perspective, of course. And it will give two outputs. One of those outputs is HR tasks that you can do yourself. And then the other output is HR tasks that you should consider hiring out for. So go through the assessment, and then at least you have information to decide what you're going to do next. If, okay, we're going to handle this, or we're going to take this in bits and pieces and as projects, or we're going to move into a retainer. But it's so much better to know exactly what needs to be updated, so you can give it to a consultant or a CFO or whomever and say, we need you to work on this specific thing, rather than, hey, can you just figure things out as you go? Like, it's just a more strategic way and a cost-effective way to get that structure in place. And again, this is all to build a foundation so you can grow from there.
Okay, great. Is this a questionnaire or a form that you have on a website, or do they have to contact you do you actually then walk them through the process? I guess.
The snapshot they can get on my website, leaninhr.com. If you want to do the assessment, it can be self-directed. If you want, I typically prefer a conversation, because almost always there's things that come up in between the questions. It's like, okay, let's just have a quick discussion about that. I'll add it to the list, so I can add it to the report that I will provide the owners after the assessment is done.
That's excellent. Excellent. And if they want to get a hold of you any other way, the best way through your website, or is there another way to contact you?
Email is fine as well, kelly@leaninhr.com. So my contact information is on my website as well. I'm on LinkedIn. So if you search Lean In HR, you will definitely find me.
Awesome. Well, Kelly, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Rich, if there's anything financially related that isn't HR related, how do they contact you?
Best way is by email at rich@xexo.net.
Sounds good. And if you need to get a hold of me, you can contact me at dan@xexo.net. Kelly, thanks again for coming on and giving us HR insight so that we don't babble on and say the wrong things. We now have an expert that we can pull into this. And we'll have you on again sometime. Maybe talk about some other issues related to HR that you come up with. I'm sure you've got plenty of good stories.
Oh, I have a few. This was a ton of fun. Thank you again for having me.
All right. Sounds good. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Books and the Biz. If today's conversation sparked new ideas for your company, the team at XCXO can help you turn those ideas into action. XCXO brings together seasoned executives, fractional CEOs, COOs, CFOs, and CXOs, who step into your business with the experience, strategy, and leadership to drive real results. Whether you're trying to scale, strengthen operations, improve profitability, or prepare for transition, our experts help you move faster and lead with confidence. To learn more or start a conversation, visit xcxo.net. That's xcxo.net